So here's several different ways that we've talked about representing fractions, and you can also use manipulatives like the pattern blocks or Cuisenaire rods. One more thing I want to talk about here, though, is using a number line. So we're going to look at some examples of that. So for example, if we were asked to plot 5/12 on a number line, typically if you're not given a number line, then for fractions that are not improper fractions, what I would recommend is just sketching a line, put arrows on the end, and then go ahead and put 0 towards one end and 1 at the other, because any proper fraction is going to be in between 0 and 1. And then you would just use your denominator to break up this space. So in this case, since I'm plotting 5/12, I would split this into 12ths. So that means I would have like 12 separate sections here. So I'm actually going to split it. To do that, I'm going to split it into fourths and then each fourth into thirds. And that should give me 12 equally sized pieces. And do it with something that erases. That way, if you don't feel like you get the spacing right, you can fix it. And if you have trouble with spacing, use a ruler. So like, for example, on this one, you could really easily use like, say, a 6-inch ruler and just measure a line that's 6 inches, and then every half inch would be a tick mark, and you'd have 12 of them by the time you're done. And so then I would just, you could label all of these if you want, 1/12, 2/12, and so on. And then when you get out to 5/12, then since it asks us to plot means we're going to use a filled in circle. And then you can continue labeling these or not. That's kind of up to you or up to the instructions on the problem. And then we can see that this would go all the way out to 12/12, but of course 12/12 is really the same thing as 1 whole. So it's fairly straightforward if you're just asked to plot and not given a number line. However, this can get a little bit more complicated if you're given a number line. So for example, let's say that we are given a number line and 0 is already plotted, and then also 5/3 is plotted. And let's say that we want to plot the number 1, for example. So where is 1 on this number line? Well, I know 5/3 is an improper fraction, right? That's technically 1 2/3. So I know that's bigger than 1. So, a simple answer to this would be to say, well, 1 is in between these two. It's somewhere between 0 and 5/3. But that doesn't mean that you can just put it wherever you want. So how do you know where in between 0 and 5/3 1 should go? You're going to need to space this evenly. And again, my denominator here is 3, and if it helps, you could also think of 0 as being 0/3, right? So really, going from 0/3 to 5/3 is really the same thing as going from 0 to 5. I'm missing, if I had a number line from 0 to 5, I'm missing marks for 1, 2, 3, and 4. So I would need to put those in here. It's just in this case, it's going to be 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, and 4/3, right? But it's the same idea. And then, of course, 3/3 is the same thing as 1 whole. So to plot 1, I would just put my filled in circle there and go ahead and write a 1 so that we know that we're talking about 1 and that's equivalent to 3/3. So what about if we have another example here? So this time, let's put 0 and 1/4. And then this time, I'm going to ask that we plot 2/3. Now this is a little bit trickier because I don't have just one denominator, right? So if I look at what's already plotted, I've got a denominator of 4 with 1/4, right? So that's already labeled. But then in order to plot 2/3, that's a different denominator. It's a denominator of 3. So this gets a little bit trickier because, what do you use, right? I can't really split it into just fourths because that would miss my thirds. I can't really split it into thirds because where is 1/4 in comparison to that? So when that happens, what you should do is you should use a common denominator. So this denominator of 3 and this denominator of 4 would have a least common multiple of 12. So what I would do here is I would use that common denominator. My least common denominator here is 12. And so go ahead and split this up into 12ths. So I might need to do some manipulation here in order to make that work. So like, for example, 1/4, if I wanted to rewrite that with a denominator of 12, what I would have to do is multiply that denominator by 3. And then whatever I multiply to the denominator, I'd have to multiply the same thing on the numerator. So really 1/4 is equivalent to 3/12. And if it helps, you can write that. But if that's 3/12, then that means I'm missing marks for 1/12 and 2/12. So this would be 1/12, 2/12, 3/12. And then now that I know what my spacing is here and that spacing looks good, I would just continue with that spacing. So however big I made this, I'm going to continue making tick marks that size, right? So I'm going to do my best to keep those evenly spaced and just keep making tick marks the same size. And each of these is a 12th. So I've got 0, 1/12, 2/12, 3/12. This would be 4/12, 5/12, 6/12, 7/12, and just keep going. And I might go ahead and just go out to 12/12 or 1 whole, although technically I only need to go out as far as the one I'm trying to plot, which is 2/3. So 2/3, when I want to plot, if I wanted to get that to have a common denominator of 12, I would have to multiply the 3 there by 4, which means I'd do the same thing to the top. So that's really 8/12. So 8/12 is really equivalent to 2/3.